Hmm. Thank you all for coming. Start off the evening with a sit. I'd like to take the moment to settle into a comfortable posture. If you need to wiggle around for a bit to find where that is, that might be a helpful thing to do. You might let the spine straighten, lift the head up a bit, tuck the chin, pull the shoulders back just slightly. And make whatever adjustments feel good to you. You might take a few deep breaths, breathing in fully, and on the out breath, letting go of whatever tension you feel in the body. On your own time, you might return to a normal breathing pattern when it feels good to you. Maybe take a few moments just to be present with what's here without any need to judge or change, just noticing. Whatever thoughts or emotions or feelings in the body are present, just let them be just as they are. And if you'd like, you can let attention rest on the sensations of the breath, whatever they feel the most prominent. Perhaps that's at the tip of your nose, in your mouth, or in your throat, in your chest, in the rise and fall of your stomach. Just wherever they feel the most prominent, you might let attention rest there. Just see what's going on without needing to change or fix. Just let the breath arise and pass away, all on its own. Just noticing the breath and seeing how present you can be with it. And although you've set the intention for attention to be on the breath, mind will inevitably wander away because that's what minds do. They explore. And when it wanders away, it will inevitably come back. When it comes back to the present moment, you might greet the mind like a lost puppy, so with kindness and joy that it's returned, rather than self-criticism and judgment. Oh, how wonderful. Mind is present again. Thank you, mind. And continuing to let attention be on the breath in the foreground of the mind. You might let all the feelings in the body arise and pass away in the background of the mind, expanding awareness to encompass the whole body while using the focus on the breath to maintain your presence. And if you'd like, while maintaining the focus on the breath, you might let awareness expand to receive all the sounds in the room, as well as the feelings of the body. Simply letting those arise and pass away on their own. Nothing you need to do, but notice. If you like, you can let awareness expand one last time while keeping the focus of attention on the breath. You might let awareness expand to encompass everything in experience, all the feelings, sounds, visual sensations, thoughts, emotions, and be held in the mind of awareness. Simply phenomena arising and passing away. Just letting the mind of awareness be open to all the phenomena arising and passing away. All the attention anchored on the breath, just the mind in the present. If the mind doesn't feel like it has much stability to it, you can continue on in that vein. But if the mind does feel collected, you might try something else. Just as when a eagle or albatross takes off, have to flap their wings, quite a bit of effort. When they reach a certain height, you can simply glide, rest in the open sky, just making a turn here or there, flipping a wingtip, resting with very little effort. Perhaps you too, having made some effort in the past 25 minutes, gotten to a place of calm and quiet, you can simply rest, letting go of all effort, except the bare minimum needed to keep the mind in the present. They rest in the open sky of the mind. Nothing needs to be done. Simply be present. Simply resting in presence as the stream of phenomena arise and pass away. All right. Go for that lovely sit. And if you want to take a minute to readjust yourself. Mm. Thank you all for coming. So last week I talked about stories, the stories that we tell. And I want to continue on from that discussion. I'll recap a little bit from last week's talk, so we're all kind of on the same page. So last week I spoke about how stories are, how we kind of connect these objects of the world, and we make sense of them, and we learn about how the world works and how to move around in the world in a way that kind of helps us meet our goals. Stories are kind of way to funnel experience to a particular state of the world. So something we want to happen. And stories are useful. They help us get around in the world. And the mind is always going to tell stories at any rate, but they're also a cause of our suffering because we tend to misunderstand. We tend to think of stories as having a kind of ground truth to them. So some truth to them, and that turns out not to be the case. The world of words and stories is one thing, and the world of direct experience is another thing. And you can't ever fully map the world of words and stories to the world of direct experience. So there's always going to be some kind of mismatch, and any kind of truth you talk about with stories is always going to be contextual truth. It's not going to be a kind of ground truth of experience. And I talked about the Buddha's words on fixed views. So in the Metta Sutta, I'll paraphrase and say, the Buddha said, by not holding to fixed views, one does not suffer. And so we can apply this to stories and say, by not holding to stories, by not holding to a fixed view of stories, by not buying into them and believing they're true, we can not suffer in that way. I spoke about a few ways to work with stories. Spoke about you can kind of compare stories as they change over time and see the fickleness of the mind and how it tells us stories. And talked about how you can look at your emotions and use them to work backwards and see what stories are being told and determine if they're really true. And finally, I talked about how practice is really the kind of way to see through stories. Practice gives you experience with a mind that doesn't need stories to be content or to be happy. And, practice lets you see how stories are constructed, so you don't buy into them so much. That's what I talked about last time. And so I want to pick up on a point I made last time. It's that so the end goal for all this is for us to see stories kind of completely transparently. They're still there, but we don't buy into them. We don't think they say anything that's got absolute truth to it. But that doesn't happen until the end of the path. And so, for most of our lives, or at least until we start to wake up, we're still buying into the stories that we tell about who we are and how we should live in the world. And so I want to talk to this point. So that the reality is that there's going to be some pull to the stories for a while. And this is my thought. You may get different thoughts from other Buddhists, but my thought is that if you're going to be pulled around by stories, if they're going to kind of determine where you're moving your life, it's helpful for them to be skillful stories. So like we wouldn't want to tell stories that were causing a lot of harm to people. We wouldn't want to cause stories that are going to let us live a life of ease and harmony with the world. Also, it's helpful to tell skillful stories about yourself rather than unskillful ones, because it's really pretty difficult to have any kind of awakening if you're telling a very negative self story. Um, when you're telling a negative self story, that's holding back a lot of stuff that the mind doesn't then have to deal with and to grapple with, perhaps like trauma from the past. And when you have an awakening, those stories are seen through, and all of that trauma or past stuff that your mind isn't ready to deal with comes to the fore. And so um, it really tries to avoid that if there's a lot of trauma and a lot of negative story being told. So it's good to or you can think about practice as a process of replacing these maybe less skillful stories that we tell about ourselves with more and more skillful stories. Um, what seems to happen as we practice is these stories get uh, kind of looser and more transparent and can be shed, and then we can tell another story that's not so constricting and so harmful. But it's always good to keep them um, with the understanding that stories are still stories, and they can still cause harm even if they're more and more skillful stories. So that's the kind of preface to what I want to talk about tonight. Tonight, I want to talk about um, a few different, in my mind, skillful stories that we like to tell about ourselves, and I think are helpful too. So the first story I wanted to talk about is, I imagine this is one we all tell about ourselves, is that I am a good person, or I'm a kind person, or something along those lines. Um, I think it's like pretty easy to see why this can be a helpful thing. I talked about stories being a kind of funnel for experience, and you can understand why if you think of yourself as a good person, you're more likely to do good things. It makes you do things that you think are good. So you can see why it's helpful in that way. But it also introduces blind spots in the way we see the world. I want to talk about a couple of them. Um, the first one is that our relationships with people change over time. And so if I have this fixed idea of what a good person means, in context of whatever relationship and I'm changing and that person is changing and that story is still static, there's going to be a mismatch. There's going to be, it's going to be out of sync. I'm thinking of an example in my life. I have a younger sister. She's like 5.5 years younger than me. And so when we were growing up, I was the older brother, right? I was to some extent, I was like kind of telling her how to do things and like showing her things and helping her learn about the world. And so I turned 18 and left the house and didn't like speak to her too much for a while. But when she left the house at 18 and she went off to college, I was relating to her from that point of view of being a big brother. That was my idea of what I should be doing, what a good person should be doing. And I was, telling her how to live her life and telling her what she should do at college and stuff like that. And she didn't need like any of that. She was like she's a more capable person than me, and she didn't need me telling her how to live her life, and that caused some friction. This happens in a lot in like, parent-child relationships too. Like, children, when they're young, need everything done for them, and of course, that changes as they get older. And if the parent can't kind of come to grips with that, they're relating to the child in a way that's not appropriate anymore. It's going to like, stifle their development. Thinking that I'm a good person um, can also be harmful when we get our idea of what a good person is from others, and maybe we don't um, fully buy into it, and that can lead to doing things that are may actually be good things and helpful things, but you might do them out of a sense of obligation something like that, you might it might be frustrating or irritating or agitating, and you might not be getting the benefit of doing these like kind things like from an open heart, because you're buying into the idea of doing this because you should be doing this. Thinking you are a good person or buying into that story can also be a shield for bad behavior, which I'm sure you've all run into. Yeah, I'm thinking of an example in my life. I have a friend. We've been friends for a while, and for a period of a couple of years in our some time ago, there was a lot of friction in our relationship, and I didn't really understand why, but I kind of put that on her. But it took me a couple years to like look at what I was doing in that relationship and realize that I was not acting out of a place of kindness, even though I sort of thought I was. Um, I was acting from a place of need, like I needed something from this person. I was being selfish, and I didn't see it because I thought of myself as a good person. And I have many more examples of that. Like it's a very easy thing for the mind to do, to think of yourself as good, so that you don't have to see the harm that you cause. And in reality, we all cause harm, and we all do good too. The second story I wanted to talk about is the story that I am a meditator, or I am a Buddhist, or a Dhamma practitioner, or something along those lines. And I think that can be quite helpful, especially in the beginning. There are some habits that are really helpful to have as part of our practice. Things like having a daily sitting practice, or having the intention to be present, or having the intention to be kind to others. And it's if you come from a place of not not doing those things, it's pretty helpful to take on this identity. A Buddhist is a person who does these things, and if you kind of throw yourself into that identity, it takes it makes it easier to make good decisions in that regard, because you have this kind of pattern for the world to be that you can just kind of let yourself go into. So I think it can be helpful. But one thing that comes along with identifying as a Buddhist or a spiritual seeker or whatever is pride. I am also very familiar with this. When I started sitting retreats some years ago, I had this kind of same conversation several times. Like typically on retreat, there's a period before the retreat starts where everyone kind of chit chats and gets to know each other and stuff. And so I've had this conversation in that context several times. Like, people are curious about like how many retreats you sat and how long you sat on retreat, and I would often get like a little excited for somebody to ask me this, and somebody would ask me like, "Have you have you been on a retreat before?" And I'd feel a little puffed up when I did. So yes, so it just yeah, that sort of thing like happens quite often. Like same sort of thing about like how long I sit. Like sitting practice has been kind of backbone of my path through the Dhamma, and I've definitely taken a lot of pride in that. That I've felt good when people ask me how long I sit. I can say this answer and they're suitably impressed, and it's very nice. Lots of pride. We can take pride in having worked with a particular teacher, having done a particular course, or gotten a particular title in a particular lineage. We can also take pride in quote unquote accomplishments. Having particular states of mind that people may want to have. Insights or awakenings in particular are something the mind really likes to have pride around. So when you have these kind of clear seeings into the world, and the ego, dissipates or kind of gets what's the word I'm looking for? Um, kind of dissipates for a bit. Um, it'll go away, but it'll try and reform, and it will look for different ways to reform itself. And one very popular one is around these insights and awakenings that we have. So the ego will look at this clear seeing that we've had, and it will find a source of pride in having been the one that's seen that. Which I think many people run into that. There's also the idea that your idea of a Buddhist or a spiritual seeker, or whatever your story is not what the actual thing is. So your idea of a Buddhist does one thing, but experience in the moment is a dynamic thing, and whatever you whatever is best for you to do in the moment is dependent on what the moment is, not on what your idea of what you should be doing is. And this has led to a lot of harm. I just picked one example, but there's the example of the Japanese military in World War II. And my understanding is that it was like there was a lot of Buddhist, there were a lot of Buddhists in there, and that were like actively involved in the war effort. And I think many of the soldiers who fought were kind of doing so under maybe not the banner of Buddhism, but the idea that they were doing something kind of spiritually right. There's a book, Zen at War, by, I'm blanking on the name. His last name was Victoria, but I'll read a short paragraph. So the Zen offered the Japanese warrior class its unconditional support in return for their patronage. By the 20th century, these attitudes had become coupled to a mechanized unitary state bent on imperial expansion. Thus, we find the famous Zen teacher Kodo writing an article titled "On the True Meaning of Zen Precepts." This true meaning, he argues, is that when the cause is just and the mind is clear, quote, whether one kills or does not kill, the precept forbidding killing is preserved. It is the precept forbidding killing that wields the sword, end quote. And Rinzai Master Nantembo wrote, there was no, quote, bodhisattva practice superior to the compassionate taking of life, end quote. Excuse me. And I don't know what was going on in their hearts or their minds, but I have a hard time thinking that someone who says that there is no bodhisattva practice superior to the compassionate taking of life is speaking out of anything but a story of how the world should be. I don't think you can look in direct experience and find that. There's many other ideas, or many other examples of people doing harmful things under the guise of being a Buddhist. Our idea about being a Buddhist or following the Dhamma, it can be very helpful. Like that's the whole point of the Dhamma. It's to give us this framework to live our lives, in which we can kind of move forward towards enlightenment. And so it's very helpful, but it has to fall away at the end. The part of the mind that wants to follow this form that says, I should be doing this, whatever this is, that grasping is what obscures enlightenment. That wanting experience to be other than the way it is what prevents us from realizing enlightenment in the moment. So it all has to go away in the end. And that brings me to the last story that I want to talk about. It's the idea of I want to be enlightened, or I'm acting in a way towards to move towards enlightenment, or even a little simpler than that. Like I want to practice for a particular goal. And I think that's probably the most skillful story we can tell ourselves, because in practical terms, you need that. You need some sort of motivation to move you forward. There's the understanding that we're already all enlightened. We just don't realize it. And there's some truth to that. But if you just take that statement and do nothing with it, you're probably not going to be enlightened. It's not helpful to anyone. It's in my mind, it's pretty clear that you need to make at least some effort to move towards enlightenment. And not doing that is not skillful. I have a quote from Christopher Titmuss, who's a long time Buddhist monk. He says, or I'll paraphrase a little. Excuse me. There's the problem of identification with the path, saying, I am on the path. And also, I regard the other view, there is no path, there is no goal, as another problematic viewpoint. Because the human being may hear that, but it doesn't actually mean anything deeply transformative takes place. I prefer the middle way, which is neither grasping onto the path and goal, nor swinging to the other extreme where we're already enlightened. We tread carefully between the two and get caught up in neither. So that's having the story, but not holding on to it too strong. And so when we do have this story, the thing to really watch out for is that the desire to be enlightened often leads to the desire for experience to be a certain way in order for you to be enlightened. And we have like any number of ways we try and do this. I have an example from my life. I enjoy this one. My first long retreat, at that point in time, I was doing some intensive concentration practice where it's helpful if the mind is very quiet. And so I had been doing this for a while, and I had kind of structured my life to support this practice. I changed my diet, at least partly to do so. I was eating all meat products, which helps the chatter in the mind die down. And this place that I wanted to sit a retreat at, like most retreat centers, it was vegetarian. And so this was a problem for me to solve. It turns out that like many of our Native American ancestors ate that way, mostly meat products. And I learned how they made their food, and I made a great deal of food to take to the retreat center. I made enough for the whole retreat. And that took several $100s and I think several dozen hours of my time. It was a fun project, but it was entirely unnecessary. I remember coming to that retreat with all the like clothes and toiletries and stuff that you would expect when you go away from home, but I also had this like big bag of supplements, to keep my mind and my body in the right kind of parameters to support my practice. And I had this big bag of Dhamma books in case I needed a teaching from any particular teacher. And I had my 2 big bags of food, and had a 95-pound kettlebell because I wanted to do kettlebell swings. It's like whole car full of stuff. It was not necessary, but I felt it was at the time. You may not have been extreme in your you may not have been that extreme, but you may have had the experience of like sitting and your mind is just going in every direction possible, and beating yourself up about that. I'm not making progress. I'm not doing meditation right. This is I should just kind of give up. that comes from the need for certain things to happen, for you to make progress, for you to move towards enlightenment, or however you're telling that story. And it's not the case. It's like if that happens, it's just whatever conditions are there, and the thing to do is just be with whatever conditions are there. It doesn't make you bad or doesn't make progress not happen. And that desire, that story gets like much more subtle too. Uh, Maybe that's something to look at sometime when you meditate. Just look at how many little things the mind tries to do to try and get the mind in a certain position that it feels is helpful. Most of us have internalized the idea that it's the mind should be quiet and should be peaceful and should be all these certain things. We we suffer because of that. Hmm. Yeah, and all that needs to be let go of by the end. So the thing to do maybe is to kind of get some momentum going, kind of funnel experience in a helpful way, and then let go, which is what I was trying to get at in the meditation earlier. The idea that you might do your concentration or do whatever, and get the mind into a helpful place, and then just let go of all effort. Mm. That's what I have for tonight. It's ultimately you want to let go of attachment to stories. That way is the end of suffering. But until that happens, it's good to tell skillful stories, but just kind of hold them lightly too. Yeah, that's what I have.